need a wider view camera.
Do we?
Hello, everybody. This is Nancy Reyes with For Your Canine.
And Lisa Bataska with Canine Defined.
Thank you for tuning in. Today we have a special treat all the way from the UK. So we have that's why we're at a different time today because we want to be kind to Dr. Murphy and Elliot so they can get some sleep. So from the UK, we have Dr. Kathy Murphy and Elliot Connor. Dr. Murphy is a veterinary surgeon and a neuroscientist, and Elliot Connor is a well-known in the UK for man trailing and scent work or scent discrimination. So we're going to let them introduce themselves a little bit, and we're going to get started. So Dr. Murphy and Elliot, welcome.
Thank you very much for having us. So I am Kathy Murphy, and I am a veterinary surgeon. I qualified in the 90s. Always had an interest in the brain, but I went into general practice to start with, and then started working with shelter dogs in my clinical career. Got more and more interested in the brain. I went down the specialty route of specializing in anesthesia and analgesia, so pain relief and general anesthesia. And that's really just because I was interested in the brain, the nervous system, how it works, how it doesn't work, how we can support our pets to be comfortable, and also understand a bit about how their brains work. And at some point, I kind of went off on a tangent and did a PhD in behavioral neuroscience, and then went off. And that's how I met up with the other guys in the Brain Camp crew who are not here today, because I moved to the States and did a professorship over there in neuroscience and veterinary anesthesia. I now work back here in the UK, but with behaviour vets. So I work with the team at Behaviour Vets, focusing on veterinary behaviour and specifically for me doing consultations in pain and behaviour. And a lot of our work is with sports dogs. So Bobby Banbury, who I work with, is a competitor, agility competitor. And a lot of the dogs that we see at Behaviour Vets come through her as pain and behaviour cases. So yeah, that's a kind of whistle-stop tour of my career. Why I'm here today is that at some point I set up Barking Brains, which is an educational platform to help bring neuroscientific information to the dog training and behaviour world, because I was seeing that there was a bit of a gap between what we do and what we understand, and I wanted to help bridge that gap. And neuroscience now, modern neuroscience, is all encompassing, so I wanted to be able to bring all of those disciplines and apply that work to what we do practically with our dogs. So Brain Camp was kind of born out of that, because if you had to listen to me just talk, then it would get boring quite quickly.
It's pretty boring.
But the great thing about Brain Camp is I can do my talky bit and get super excited and geeky about all the brain stuff. And then we can actually work with the dogs at Brain Camp, either your dog if you've got a working spot or other people's dogs if you're auditing. And we can work with the dogs on the exercises that we've developed out of that brain theory, all the neuroscience and the kind of foundational theory work. And we get to put it into practice. And we get amazing results during the seminar. Like we also get, it's great to kind of travel around and we meet people who have been to our earlier brain camps and find out how they're getting on, and find out the amazing results that they're getting in the various disciplines that they're doing. But we also get amazing results actually during the seminars. So for me, that's fabulous because I do a bit of talking at the beginning and then I get to watch these guys with all their practical skills.
Oh, wow. That sounds great. All right. I'm so excited that you guys are coming. So anyway,
Yeah, I think you'll love it. So
I think so too.
my name's Elliot, and I'm the husband. She wouldn't change her name, but so I started man trailing probably about 8 or 9 years ago. I was in search and rescue for 5 years, and that's where I started to learn how to man trail, which is scent specific trailing basically. So it's finding missing people from their scent. So you can use like their toothbrush, their pillowcase, a bit of clothing, their car door, anything you like. During that time, I got really interested in how scent works, how the dogs reacted all the time to what we do, and out in the environment. So I decided to try and do a bit of scent work with my dog, and I just got hooked in that straight away. I spent 2.5 years with a very good scent work trainer in the UK, basically just shadowing. And I learned everything that I know now pretty much from them. I'm also registered with a company in Holland, in the Netherlands, called Scent Imprint for Dogs, where I actually have my qualifications from in man trailing and in scent work. And now I teach all over the world. Brain Camp was brilliant, really, because for me, my thing is about letting the dogs do their thing and not interrupting too much, so that when they're doing scent work, I like them to be away from the person if they can. You know, if they don't have to have a leash on, I like to just stand there and watch the dogs do what they want to do. And that's really good for me. So listening to Kathy at Brain Camp and the other two, Bobby and Tracy, I started to realize what was going on in the dog's brain, and how giving them that space is the best thing for the dog, so that they don't have any pressure. Well, I'm all about not pressuring the dog to do anything, basically, and trying to guide the dog to do its own thing.
We basically, we look at the neural processes around autonomy, what it means for the dog to work autonomously, and how we balance that with being able to guide the dog so that they're actually doing the task that we want them to do. And how do we actually get them to be self-motivated to do that task in the way that we want them to do it, without having to interfere with their natural flow. So it's about learning the theory that then leads you to train in a way that enables you to harness that natural drive, but harness and direct it without interrupting the dog's natural flow.
So that's really interesting. With I know it's scent work, it's easier to do that because, you know, in scent work, you give them a search cue, and if they know their job, it's easy to let them kind of go and do that thing. In agility, they still have to, you know, work with you. So they have, I don't know, I would say less autonomy-ish, because they have to still do what you tell them, versus in scent work, we really are, it's
Directed.
a little different, right? Because in scent work, they are more independent, if you will, and they are able to just do their own, you know.
Yeah. I mean, they definitely have less autonomy in sports like agility, because you have to sort of tell them, you know, you can't just put a dog on a course and expect it to know the course. I mean, I don't do agility, but I look at these courses and think, how the hell does anyone remember what's going on? Let alone if you just let a dog go on the start line with pure autonomy, you know, you're not going to get anywhere. But the games that we've sort of developed for basically sports dogs, so it covers all of the sports dogs, all these little games that we can do to make the dogs do better at their sports. We've developed that they're not specifically for each subject, especially the puppy day. They get all the instructors, so all the different sports, but the games are for all the different sports. On the adult days, there is more, like my games will be more towards scent work, and obviously Tracy and Bobby's will be more towards agility.
And one of the interesting things is we explore that whole question about different sports and what skills are required for different sports. And if you look at agility is definitely less autonomy than scent work, because, you know, like as Elliot said, you can't show them a course map and then just let them go. But what's going on in their brain is also different, because when they're doing scent work, which is very natural, right? Because they are following a scent. It's actually, man trailing is, you know, one of the most natural ways to actually engage in a prolonged olfaction. So their attentional processing is just focused on the olfactory cue, and they navigate through the environment. And actually the skill for them is in being able to ignore the other environmental cues. So if they come across coyote, scat, or, you know, whatever it is that's delicious and lovely, the skill there is about, okay, I'm staying on my man trail, you know, I'm going to stay on that scent. I'm going to remain selectively focused on that scent and then just ignore the other scents. Within agility, it's more complex, right? Because they're having to take visual cues from you. They're also having to take auditory cues from you. They can't watch you the whole time because they have to navigate the course. Whilst they're listening to you and watching your body language and taking cues from your body language, they have to avoid the obstacles, i.e. not knock the jumps down and not, you know, knock the wings over and go through the tunnels correctly, etc. And they have to balance. So there's a lot of proprioceptive control and also, you know, managing their acceleration and deceleration to be able to predict what's needed for the next obstacle. So the attentional processing for agility is phenomenally complex, and they're doing all of that extremely quickly. I mean, it's more complex than flyball. Flyball is unbelievably quick. Like how quick those dogs move is just phenomenal. And the motor precision required is phenomenal. But in agility, even though they're not completing their course within the same sort of time, they're actually completing a lot of complex movements and attentional switching in their brain between focusing on visual attention, auditory attention, proprioceptive attention, etc. And we unpack that in Brain Camp. So we unpack it in the talks that we're doing and then describe to participants how we develop these exercises and how these exercises will support the dogs going forward into their careers. So it's not just about, you know, like you called it a game. Yes, we're going to be doing games and it's going to be fun. Like we will have fun. We always yeah, I usually get the giggles at some point. Elliot and I usually have a marital dispute at some point. You know, it's very entertaining. So we will definitely have fun.
Sometimes we don't even talk to each other for the whole weekend.
But really what we're doing is we're building foundations in that seminar that you know the participants can then take and run with, so that they're building those neurobiological pathways that are going to help support the dog to be able to flourish in whatever sport they do. So it's very slightly tweaked for each of those disciplines because the neurobiology that is going on in the dog's head for each of those disciplines is different. So yeah, it's a really, that's why I love it. I mean, I'm super geeky anyway, but if anyone's geeky, they definitely want to come because we go off on lots of tangents and we always we take our feed from the audience. So whatever the audience is interested in, we'll unpack in that seminar and then very much apply it to the work that's going on. And we can, you know, we reflect also. So we'll go and do a practical part of the day and then we'll come back and we'll all reflect as a group. And then we'll kind of unpack some.
Yeah, I mean, Kathy basically does a talk first thing in the morning. And then from that talk, we'll go off in our groups and do exercises that relate to that talk that she's given. And then we'll come back to the middle or whatever. And Kathy will do another talk and then we'll all go off and do the practicals for that.
So we try and do bite size so that you don't get bored of listening to me talk all the time.
Oh, no. Well, Lisa and I already went to a workshop, the Resilience Rainbow. We were just we're a little on the geeky side as well. So
yeah, right. I also saw you. We went to, was it North Carolina?
Carolina, yeah.
So I also saw Brain Camp a couple of years ago when you guys were in South with Tracy again, not this last December, I think the December before.
Carolina.
And I had my baby Papillon.
With us?
Yes.
Why don't I remember that? I remember your baby Papillon. Which location was that?
North Carolina.
Was where Tracy.
Was it Deb Norman's place?
Was that where Tracy was? Because that's what Tracy trains out of.
Yeah. I've got terrible memory. Right. Yeah. Okay. Now I'm putting everything together because you looked at me before, and I was like, yeah, and we spoke before. Yeah.
Yeah, because I wanted to go to that Brain Camp. Unfortunately, I was traveling as well, so it wasn't able to go. So, let me ask you. So, like one of the things that is a big I don't want to say problem, a big issue, if you will, in scent work as well as agility, is dogs being highly aroused.
Yeah.
And I know there's different levels of arousal in depending on the dog and depending on what they're getting ready to do. And listening to you mention about how in agility they have to switch from auditory to visual to the whole thing. We're going to geek out a little bit from a neurological position. How I know the games will kind of address some of that, but that's got to be one of the more challenging issues or problems if you have a dog that tends to be on the higher end of that. And you can imagine many of the agility dogs are. In nose work, we can go from not so motivated to, super aroused. So we have a bigger spectrum, but I know in agility, a lot of those dogs have a lot more arousal, and some are not able to too much, right? To be able to focus.
I assume you'll talk about the curve quite a lot.
Yeah, so we'll go through some of the fundamental neurobiology around arousal. Arousal is really interesting because you get kind of generalized arousal, which is what we're usually talking about most of the time when we talk about arousal in dogs. And then you've got kind of specific arousal around what type of arousal it is. But it's also really interesting because arousal can go up and it can go down, and it can do both of those very quickly. And some dogs have very good control over their arousal. So like peak control of arousal would be a dog that's relatively calm when it arrives at the trial, gets out of the car, does its thing, trots down, cues up, no big drama, goes into the ring, and then is like a fireball around the course, and then comes out and is like, oh, okay, I'll just have a sniff here, I'll go back in the car. That's actually quite rare. Why? Because it is so incredibly difficult. That's like, when you take your kids to a party and then you expect them to come away from the party and immediately just be chill and quiet and just think, oh yeah, I'll just, that's not reality, right? Because it's really hard to be able to control your arousal levels to that extent. So that's, you've pulled one of the key components of what we do in Brain Camp, which is that we look at these skills that aren't usually approached as skills. Most people think of skills for agility as jumping the jump or wrapping the wing or, those kind of things. But actually to be able to practice and learn to control arousal levels for a dog is going to improve their performance astronomically.
That's important.
Why? Because anytime their arousal level is higher than it needs to be, they're draining their resources. They're using glucose, they're using oxygen, they're using up all of the metabolites, etc., that they would be using for normal healthy function. And if they don't have such good control over their arousal levels to be able to gently bring their arousal level back down so that they can step back down to, going home and relaxing, they're not going to sleep as well. Their sleep's going to be disrupted, etc. And what we also know is that when dogs can engage in exercises that support them to control that arousal levels, we see them sleep better, we see them recover better from the change in routine associated with trialing versus non-trialing, and we see their general well-being improve such that their resilience improves, and they can then therefore relax more in a trial environment. They can therefore have more of their focus and attentional load, so that amount of bandwidth, if you like, in their brain focused on the task in hand and less likely to be drained by what's going on around them. So arousal is absolutely, or control over arousal is absolutely key to the success of performance dogs.
And we do have exercises that bring arousal up and bring arousal down, because some dogs aren't aroused at all when they go in there, right? Especially
for scent work and
because it's low energy. You need to bring their arousal up before they even start, but we have exercise to do that. And if they're too aroused, we have exercise to bring it down. So all these things can be worked on at home, but also sometimes just before the trial. So you get the dog out of the car, you can do a few exercises with it, and you can lower and raise the arousal to how you want it. so that they're much more concentrating in the ring.
And that's one thing that we spotted. I think that's one of the motivations for Brain Camp, is that, you know, those exercises that we do out in the world are more and more common now for pet dogs that are struggling with arousal levels. But we were seeing that there was this kind of gap, if you like, in the performance dog world, and that still we had a lot of dogs that were kind of doing amazing work at home, amazing practice, amazing preparation. But then it's almost like, okay, now we're going to trial, and there's no support there between leaving the house and actually getting in the ring. And so that by the time they get in the ring, there's already missed opportunity. And we wanted to be able to say, we can give you tools that you can utilize, and you can modify, you know, which tools you choose, which exercises you choose, how you use them. We can give you lots of different tweaks and tips and tricks and all of those things, so that really by the end of Brain Camp, you are leaving with a very individualized plan for how you're going to bridge that gap and how you're going to make sure that everything else that goes into performance, you know, high performance levels, is catered for. And if you speak to athletes, you know, athletes will tell you, sure, I'm going to learn to jump the hurdles and I'm going to practice, you know, doing that with precision. But actually, the vast majority of their time off the track is spent preparing for their, you know, improving their resilience, exercises to bring their arousal levels up and down so that they get that arousal control. You know, all of those things are what go into preparing them for on the day having the best performance. So that's kind of what Brain Camp is designed around, is filling in those gaps.
So let me ask you another question. And Lisa, if you have one, jump in. I had another question. So a lot of and a couple of the people who have already signed up for Brain Camp will be there. So some of the dogs are very, very sensitive to the handler's emotional situation during trials, right? Specifically in agility, it's a little easier to manage, if you will, because the time in that sport is short, right? Hopefully, once they start, they're done in 45 seconds. So the handler is going to probably be more focused on something else. They're not going to be fretting as much, if you will. But in nose work, the search times are much longer. Yeah. So a lot more where the handler can get worried or stressed or whatever. And then sometimes the dogs, depending on how sensitive the dog is, picks up on that and is like, you're kind of being weird. I can't.
What are you doing?
It's like any dog training, isn't it? You can train your dog at home and it's all perfect. And as soon as you go out into a competition environment, you fall apart. So I suggest diazepam.
Good.
We can certainly help with that sort of thing. It's just about trying to keep the same mindset basically that you do at home. It's trying not to go to trials thinking of them as trials. Like whatever I teach my students, it's always wherever you go to, it's training, right? And you do find that they will relax a little bit more. But I know some people are always going to be, it's like taking an exam. Some people are always going to be nervous doing it, but we can definitely help the dogs to get through it.
Yeah.
And one thing we go through is why it's illogical to keep everything perfectly calm at home when you're practicing, because actually you will have nerves on the day in the trial. And if you've got a really sensitive dog, one of the things that's really useful is to build a level of either resilience and or tolerance for the fact that you're now acting weird. Because it is like you said, Nancy, the dog's in there like going, what? It wasn't like this at home. And we can do that by actually simulating some of that excitement back at home. And so we talk about that during Brain Camp. How can we do that? Because we can't exactly simulate the trial environment. But what sorts of things can we do that might help simulate what the dog is going to experience on trial day, so that when they get to trial day, they're just like, oh yeah, this is a bit like at home when you're acting weird at home. And we've got various different games that we can do with the dogs to kind of help mix it up at home, so that you're moving from, you don't do this initially when you're first starting out with a very inexperienced dog. You get your foundations in, make sure that you've got your, relationship foundations, all of the foundations that we go through on day one, which is puppies and adolescent dogs, about how to support their resilience and how to have them, controlling their arousal levels, etc. But as soon as we've got those foundations in with some foundational skills for whatever discipline they're doing, then we can start mixing it up and making it a little bit less predictable, and start doing things that will bring our arousal levels up, bring our anxiety levels up, so that we're simulating that trial environment at home, and then the jump between at home and trial becomes less. And that's relatively controversial, because people say, shouldn't you just practice being perfect at home? Well, how does that go? For some dogs, they can cope with that. But for those dogs that can't cope with that because it's too starkly different between home and trial, then the only way we're going to be able to do that is to very carefully and purposefully create some of that anxiety at home and practice being amazingly good in that at-home environment under those conditions, and how to mix it up and make it less predictable. Because the other thing about trial environments is not only us that are acting weird, right? They also have to deal with the fact that, there are these strange dogs around, and for some dogs they take that in their stride and they're like, yeah, just another trial.
Yeah, exactly.
But some dogs, are not, and they're like watching everything, and they're not sure, where their attention should go. And apart from anything else, even if that isn't showing in their performance in the ring, it's definitely draining their energy. And one of the things we want to be able to do is have them utilize the least amount of energy to be their best selves at trials. So
that brings me to and I don't know if it's true, because I haven't I've gone to Asia. I have not gone to the UK, the Europe. But one of the issues we're having here is a lot of the dogs for most of our sports have to be in a crate. They have to be crated so they can rest and all that. And usually, if people train it early on, the dogs usually have really no issue being able to go in there and relax and rest and everything else. And I wonder where Lisa went. So they have less of an issue with that versus and that's one of the problems we're having. The dogs are so stressed being in a crate, or they're not happy, or they weren't trained to be in a crate, because now that's becoming more of an issue, if you will, versus before everybody crate trained their dogs. Not anymore. For whatever reason, it's just not happening. Not happening. I don't know why. So that's causing the dogs not to have that safe place or that quiet place to be, whether it's in a crate or a car or whatever. So, and that, like you said, it just goes back to about draining the energy for the dog, because if the dog's upset about being in a crate, it's going to affect how they're going to work in and right or wrong. So in Europe, because I know you guys don't.
They do for agility, generally. Okay. I think a lot of agility shows now the dogs will be kept in the vehicles. Scent work and man trailing, we never do it. Or some people do, but it's kind of
The difference is we don't usually train in indoor locations, and if they are indoors, they're usually next to the vehicles. And because our weather is like that, it's like always raining, always cold. 2 days in the middle that are really hot. I'm being facetious, but our weather is not too extreme right now in 2024. So we have the luxury of most of the time being able to manage the temperature.
And it helps the dogs a lot, because Kathy will explain a bit more, but when dogs after their training or after the thing, if they do go back into somewhere they feel completely safe and they can actually sleep, that's where they learn. that's where they learn what they've just learned, and that's when it actually sets in their mind, right?
Yeah, and the good news is that we can make huge inroads into recreating that in the situation that you're talking about. So those kind of big indoor venues where you've got an area where the crates are, so that the dogs are in a temperature controlled environment. And we'll go through tips and tricks of how to do that, and then how to create that kind of safe space. That's what you're looking for. And it sounds dramatic, like safe space. My dog's not unsafe. No, it's not. But, you know, in terms of being able to create an environment that your dog goes into that is familiar and predictable, we'll talk about predictability and how important it is for the brain processes, how to create that a micro environment so that, like you said, Nancy, there's less energy drained before the dog is then taken out, either for training, because that's, you know, often the environment that they're in for the training as well, or for trialing. So yeah, and it is a challenge, because unless we also include that as something that we want to work on in order to, you know, create a well-rounded performer, if you like, then we're missing a crucial piece of the jigsaw puzzle, because it's not, you know, the 45 seconds is how we judge how well the day went, but there's all the other stuff that goes into preparing the dog mentally for being able to walk into the course space and perform.
Right. Well, like in scent work here, the dogs are kept in the cars, but you know, we crate them in the car, or they can be loose in the car. And a lot of dogs, so they're used to that. Some, you know, are used to that. But like at our facility, you know, we create inside because we have classes. I mean, sometimes if we go off site, obviously the dogs are in their cars, and that's kind of how we work it. So they're used to that. But we're finding people that are pet owners now becoming dog sport enthusiasts, you know, and they switch over. The dogs had never been crate trained, so then crate training for the dog sports becomes a problem, because it's like here, especially in the US, we create, you know, agility venues. Nobody does it outside anymore because, you know, they don't want to.
Much rather be inside. I'd
be the opposite.
Yeah, they want to be inside and comfortable and all that stuff. So we haven't had outdoor trials, and oh my gosh, I cannot tell you. I mean, some places still do, but it's not very common. Most of the time are in facilities. And scent work, most of the scent work, they are created out of their cars most of the time. But there's other, you know, some of the venues where you can create inside as well. But a majority of the scent work they are created, you know, in their cars for the competitions. But for classes, they can do a combination of both. But even then, some dogs are not comfortable in the cars either. So
no. I mean, you've got to train one or the other, really, haven't you? Otherwise, you're going to be a bit stuffed with your training and trials or whatever. If the dog's panicking, if the dog's not happy, it's not going to perform how you want it to perform.
And as Elliot said, we'll go through some of the neurobiology that's relevant to this in terms of sleep and rest, and what good quality sleep and rest looks like, and how we can set things up so that we can make the most of that. Because that's another thing is, you know, if the dog is awake for that whole period during the day when they're learning, you know, if you're at training, etc., that's not optimal for the brain. It's certainly possible for the dog to learn and still, you know, make progress, but they'll make much better progress if we can break that up according to how the brain cycles in terms of sleep and rest needs, because that will support learning, it will support memory, and it'll also support, you know, saving all of those valuable resources. So it's a good example of something that's important that you wouldn't usually think of.
So let me go ahead, Lisa. Go ahead.
One of the things, the reason why I personally liked Brain Camp when I first saw it, and that's when I was like, Nancy, we should really do this. It's really cool. The thing that really drew me was, so in competitions, I see in agility, very highly aroused dogs, knocking bars, having a hard time, stuff like that. And I like that you talk about the arousal piece of it and how to work it, because people don't know how to do that. And some people, in my opinion, I'll say that, believe that drive is arousal, right? And we know, and that becomes problematic because it can interfere with performance. And so people they get frustrated and so forth with that piece. That really drew me. I'm geeky too. I love all the biology aspect of it. So for me, I was just drooling as you were talking. So that was awesome. And then just the way to apply it and stuff. And I've incorporated a lot of the stuff from what you guys have done just for regular everyday dogs, so to speak.
Yeah.
But here's my question in relation to arousal. Because of what's happening in the brain, and if you can kind of talk about that, is there an impact? It's harder for teenagers to be able to bounce up and down versus a puppy or an older dog? Can you talk a little bit about that?
So the adolescent brain is really fascinating. It's one of my favorite topics because basically everything's developing along a normal trajectory during puppyhood, and then things go weird during adolescence, and then everything kind of settles out in adulthood. And the weirdness becomes something that we end up fighting against unless we actually understand it. But once we understand what's going on in the brain, then it helps us to be able to support the adolescent dog through that period, working with what's going on in the brain rather than against what's going on in the brain. And there are some really big things that change during adolescence. So, one of the things is that part of generalized arousal is that you get this release of adrenaline and cortisol. So you get this kind of spike in all of the chemicals that are around the body that enable the body to be that active and to increase activity levels. And initially, that's increasing attentional focus. Like if you go into an exam, you need to be a little bit nervous and a little bit jittery to be able to focus on the exam and to be able to exclude everything else that's going on around you. And the same is true when it's happening to our dogs, is you get that release of adrenaline and cortisol and all of the cytokine and hormonal changes, etc., that happen as arousal level increases. But if the arousal level keeps increasing, what actually happens is that there's a tip over point. And this is the same with the example of going into an exam. If you're a little bit anxious going into an exam, you're going to be able to perform better because you can focus on the exam. If you're really anxious, so if you're a bag of nerves, you're actually not going to do as well in the exam. Why? Because you're so nervous and so jittery that you can't focus on the task in hand. And the same happens for our dogs. Now, during puppyhood is all about trying the extremes of emotion, different emotions, the extremes of arousal, different arousal levels. And you'll see puppies, get very, very aroused, very, very active. And then, 5 minutes later, they're fast asleep. So they go through those cycles of arousal really quickly. But during adolescence, the biology changes such that it becomes much more difficult for the dog to be able to control its arousal levels. And any stress, and by stress, I don't mean like trauma, I mean just general kind of, wow, I didn't expect that, or whoa, that's exciting. So when we talk about stress in that sense, we're talking about anything that increases that adrenaline and cortisol release and that kind of physiological effect. But anything that triggers that in an adolescent dog is going to take twice as long for those levels to come back down to normal. So it's going to take twice as long for the adrenaline to come back down to normal. It's going to take twice as long for the cortisol to come back down to normal. And yet, because we've been training during puppyhood, we're like, what's going on here? You know how to do this. Like, you know how to manage that I'm throwing the ball for you and then I want you to do a sit-stay, for instance. As an example, I've seen that you're brilliant at this during puppyhood. Why is this suddenly going wrong now? Oh, it must be because you're naughty, or it must be because my training's failing, or it must be because I need to change something. If we just understand that it takes twice as long for the dog to be able to bring their adrenaline and cortisol levels back down, then we understand, oh, okay, so now this is harder for you during adolescence than it was during puppyhood. And interestingly, it's harder for you during adolescence than in puppyhood and adulthood. It's like adolescence is the sandwich, the sandwich filling in the middle. Everything is much harder. And along with that, their prefrontal cortex, which is the bit of the brain right at the front that makes all of the decisions, that's what kind of we do our thinking with, if you like. That bit of the brain in adolescence during puppyhood, that bit of the brain is developing along a trajectory that has it be roughly the right size compared to the back of the brain. But because of the way the back and the front of the brain develop, as we go into adolescence, the prefrontal cortex, the front part of the brain, is actually relatively smaller than the back of the brain. So now in adolescence, you have a dog that has a brain that finds it really difficult to make decisions. And it's not that they can't, if it was that they couldn't, we would notice that we couldn't do anything with any adolescent dog. We know that we can with some adolescent dogs, but we also know that a lot of adolescent dogs find it difficult. Why? Because they could easily make the right decision during puppyhood, but now during adolescence, it's much harder to be able to make decisions and take control of those emotional responses.
And also on a what people get when they have adolescent dogs, and they think, oh, you can't do this and you're not doing it properly, they tend to train more.
Yeah.
That's the worst thing you can do for your dog. Train the same or train less while they're going through adolescence. It's still going in, isn't it? It's still,
and train differently, mix things up more, because the attention span is shorter. Their ability to tolerate anything that isn't, quite what they were expecting is lower. And again, it's not absolute. It's not like they can't tolerate anything, but it's just that everything is so much harder. So once we go through that, as Elliot said, we can set you up with, okay, so this is how to set up your training sessions for the adolescent brain. And this is how to, what to expect during adolescence, and how to decide what you're going to teach during puppyhood, and how that's going to be different in adolescence. And then the great thing is, if we do that, it all comes together in adulthood. So they get there eventually, and they get there, just as well. But if we get stuck in adolescence working against the way the brain is working, then that's where things could become quite stressful for the dog and for the handler.
And don't worry, it is adolescence. It will happen.
Yeah.
So the more you think about it, the more you're going to be focused on, right, how can I get this training right? You do more and more training, the dog gets more and more confused. So you just got to accept that it's going to happen to most dogs. And just
I'm in that process as well with my he's almost 2. He'll be 2 in maybe 4 months or so. Right now, I'm having to learn how to.
Adolescents can go up to 4 years old?
Yeah,
Like you come out of adolescence and then you do a couple of good training sessions, then that's it.
Yeah. And that's kind of where I'm at too with my young lab, which you will both get to meet. But yeah, he's like
brilliant.
Well, I guess for me, the practical application of what you're talking about, because I found this missing. I've heard different things. You know how you go through, it's kind of like, I guess, the adolescent brain. So I'm going through some health stuff and I'm like, oh, dogs feel like that too. Like, oh, I should consider that. And I find when I work with people, and I work more from a pet perspective, we do day school and stuff like that. I mean, I play games, but I stepped away from that. I focus more on where the dogs need to stay in homes. Usually if you're doing a sport with the dog's pretty much going to stay, right? So that's great. But I want the dogs to stay in the homes because, the shelters are full now with all ages, but primarily they were full more with teenagers because people don't want to put the work in. Right. So when I heard all this, I'm like, you guys, we're missing a really valuable piece. Like biologically, they are not equipped to handle that right now. Yeah. So people would get upset and resort to more heavier training. And obviously there's a whole nother story behind that and why that could become very dangerous during the age of teenage time. Right. Which I'm hoping you'll kind of address as well.
Yeah. The adolescent brain is also more sensitive to punishment training. So that punishment training is going to have a different impact to the development of the brain than it would at other times. So adolescence is, I always say that it's a time when we really need to protect them, understand them, protect them. And that doesn't mean say, hey, take a break for the next 2 years. I'll meet up with you when you're 3.5 or whatever. It's not about that, but it's just about having that understanding and compassion and the knowledge about, once you understand the neurobiology, then you understand, oh, okay, I can see now how to structure things in a supportive way. And I can see now what to expect as I'm moving with the dog through adolescence. So like you say, you know, we can avoid that reaching for something else, reaching for the harsher training methods, or as Elliot said, even just, you know, the choice to train more.
Overtraining.
Overtraining, because some dogs come out of adolescence and, you know, that even if they've had kind methods training, they've been overtrained during adolescence in an attempt to kind of control this. And there's a way to be able to continue to train without overtraining, which we go through. Yes. And we'll touch upon that on the puppy day as well, because the puppy day goes up to 14 months. So we're getting some adolescent dogs in the puppy day as well. So we'll go through what some of those brain changes are on the puppy day too.
So Elliot, I had a question. We have a sport here in the US. I don't know if it's big in the UK. It's called barn hunt. So what it is, it's
it's come over here now. Yeah.
So one of the challenges in that particular sport is the way it's set up here, is that they are put in they call it a blind. So there's like, I don't know, 4 or 5 dogs in there. And then they go in and search or, you know, do their thing. Yeah. And for some dogs, it's a big problem because some are not great with other dogs. Some of them, it's a cue that they know they're going to go in and do this.
So hold on. So they have more than one dog in the search area?
Well, no, not in the search area. In the blind where they're waiting to go in and search.
Right. Okay.
So the way it's set up. So let's say, for example, you're in a room with 5 other dogs seated with your handlers, and one dog at a time you go in and search. But being in that space for some dogs, it's a cue that they're going to go in there and do that search, right? Yeah. So they already know they're sitting there with all these dogs, and depending on what number you are, it's usually 5 dogs. So 1 through 5. So if you're dog number 5, you've got to wait until all those dogs go.
What's the reasoning that they have sort of
the reason they do it is for that particular, like all those 5 dogs will have the same hide, if you will.
Right. Okay.
Right. The rat will be in the same place for those 5 dogs, so that those people can't see where the rat is, you know, whatever. And then they change it. The next 5 dogs the hide is in a different spot. Right. So that's why they have to be sequestered in that space.
Because don't you have the same hide in nose work? But you don't have.
Yes, in nose work, right? In nose work, we have the same hide, and that doesn't apply to nose work. But the person that developed this sport, that's kind of how she set it up. So right. I don't know why. Yeah, I suppose it's because in scent work, the people who are helping aren't running the dog, so they can't see what the hide is. So in barn hunt, we need, it's very labor intensive. So that way people can help. So the people while they're waiting, and then so they move the hide. So that's another challenge that we don't have in nose work, because you're right. In nose work, the hide doesn't change for all the dogs run on the same hide, versus in barn hunt, so there's residual odor from the rat. You put it down, then it's going to move, and you have to move it. So the discrimination has to be much sharper in barn hunt than it does in nose work, if you can make that. So the arousal. So for some dogs, it's two different types of arousal, right? One of them, they can be just really amped up about going in and playing the game, and some of the other arousal could be that they're really stressed about being in there with all the dogs, which is. So is that 2 different types of arousal for them, and would those be differently addressed or whatever? Because I just thought about that, because in barn hunt, some of the dogs are like, woohoo, we're gonna play the game, and they're waiting and they get more amped up. Other dogs are like, oh my god, all these dogs.
For some dogs, it'd be like going to the vet.
Yeah, right.
Well, it
Yeah.
will sitting in the waiting room with other dogs.
Yeah.
You know,
Yes.
a lot of dogs don't like that. It's definitely different arousal, isn't it?
Yeah. So
One's excitement and
yeah, and also one's goal directed and one's not, which means that the dogs that know, that are predicting what's coming next and have high arousal related to that, even if there's a bit of stress or anxiety mixed in with there because there are 4 other strange dogs in the room, you know, nothing's clean, right, in biology.
Right.
Everything's a little bit mixed. But those dogs are going to be able to switch their brains into an attentional focus on the anticipation of what's coming next. So they have an outlet for that energy. They have an outlet for the adrenaline, the cortisol, the hormones, the cytokines, everything that's running around their body. The dogs that are not so much focused on predicting what's coming next, but more thinking, what's going on here? Am I going to get eaten? They don't have that same outlet. So that's a very different internal process. There are a lot of other things going on internally that can be changing their physiology, and they'll have different changes in inflammatory markers, etc. They may well have different levels of amping up and damping down parts of their nervous system, etc. So their experience and how they feel will be very different. So yeah, that's really interesting. I actually didn't know that either.
No, I didn't
about
realise
the holding pen, if you like. So
Yeah.
that's another aspect then that we can include in the brain camp if we have people that are coming for the scent track that are interested in barn hunt, because then we can go through what those differences are and we can include that in how would you support your dog in managing that, because there are ways that we can support the dog in managing that. For instance, we can go through a toolbox of exercises that you can do with your dog while you're waiting in that area that give them an outlet for that anxiety and that anticipation, etc., so that they don't have the same internal state changes. So they've got that outlet, and then they're going into the barn hunt ready to go. So yeah, it's really interesting.
It is interesting because in scent work, it's it's not like it's not like
yeah.
that. It's the same height. Everybody doesn't look, and that's why everybody waits to go and do their. So it's not the same thing versus, it's just very interesting that for barn hunt, I was like, because I thought about that because now I'm doing barn hunt with my little beagle that I rescued, and for her, it's been she likes other dogs, so that's not a stressor for her. But I did notice some of the dogs that were sitting in there, I was observing, like you could tell that some of the dogs are like, let's go, let's do it. And the other dogs are like, oh my God, there's all these dogs. And so, and
so there's a lot we can do to support them with that. A lot we can do. And we can help people because, the great thing about these events is the auditing spots, right? The handler spots are amazing, but the auditors get to see each of the different dogs. There's no pressure on you, so you can relax. So you can take in all of the information as well. But yeah, we can go through the different tools and how you might identify which tools are most likely to be effective for a particular dog. And the great thing about the working spots is we usually have a real mix of breeds and a mix of ages and a mix of disciplines, which is actually really interesting because we also get, different types of dogs with different needs, etc. So the auditors will get to see kind of each of those, and we can have discussions around each of their individual needs.
Yeah, because I was thinking about that. I was like, because in barn hunt, I know I see now that I'm actively doing it. I thought about that. I'm like, because in nose work, a lot of the stressors before the sniffing part is being in the car or whatever, and people dealing with some of that, right? And we usually try to help our folks with that. But in barn hunt, that's very specific to that particular sport, and I've seen both of those pieces, how that works for each dog. So I thought that was I was like, oh. I wanted to, when you guys come, I definitely, or Elliot, maybe address that a little bit in that, because I don't know if we have anybody, I think we have some people who do all this, do barn hunt as well. And and I think that would be a really interesting, because that's different than any, right?
Yeah.
Like, the whole,
Yeah.
Totally.
it's like going. You're right, Elliot. Perfect.
You'll also have all those people, those 5 people in there, probably quite nervous.
Yes.
So you have the nervous energy in the room as well, which dogs obviously we know pick up on that sort of thing as well. So that whole, that's quite a stressful situation, I think, for a dog.
It's quite an intense social situation as well, in terms of what's going on socially. And we all know that, you know, most strangers feel mildly uncomfortable if they're in a room with other strangers, right? You know, as humans, we're not the best at being able to sit in those situations and be completely chilled. So there's a lot going on that our dogs will be aware of and that our dogs are processing. They're socially processing all of that information. And one way around that is to redirect that. And we can go through, you know, some of the exercises that would be suitable for redirecting that you can practice outside of that environment and then utilize when you get there, so that there's some familiarity and predictability around that part of the experience.
Yeah. So I have a question for, sorry, Nancy, I had a question for Elliot. When I first saw you, I think it was your first time you guys did the brain camp. Like, because the first one was supposed to go as virtual, and then we did that one. So my question to you is, in Europe, what is the equivalent or similar sport? Because I know you had mentioned that, and I was just kind of curious about that sport, just because, like in the US, there are some super high competitive sports, right? And then there's other venues, I should say, within the sports that are a little more lenient, I want to say, or helpful, conducive to both the learner, the handler, and the dog. And I like those sports to have that or I like those particular sports. So if I have a venue that has a way of a transition to something, so I'm curious, in Europe, what kind of things are you doing in terms of scent work?
What kind of things?
Or venues or what have you, the sport called?
It's quite similar. It's quite similar to the States. I must admit that over in Europe, we do teach it slightly differently. So whoever comes to Brain Camp or to see me will notice certain changes. And we do have trials, but our trials, there's only one trial like most of the trials in the States, where everything's about time. But there's 3 or 4 other companies over here that do trials, and it's not about time. I mean, you have a certain amount of time to search to find the odor, but it doesn't come into your placings. So what I feel that does is allow everyone to relax a little bit more. And I see some good skills from handlers, because handlers aren't just, right, okay, we've got to do this as quick as possible. So corners get cut sometimes and things get missed and things like that. And the trials that we do, where, for instance, if a trial lasts 5 minutes, if a search lasts 5 minutes over here, the trials that I teach and judge for, we probably take 10 minutes after each run to write down to the person information about what we saw in that trial. So it gives them something to go home with and to practice. I'm fine. I do teach a few people in the States online, and they're doing very well at NACSW. Is that what it's called, NACSW?
Yeah, that's right.
But I had to change my training to try to make sure they get that their times are good. Because if your times aren't good, you're never going to get anywhere. So what I did was I taught accuracy rather than anything else. In the like maybe NW1 and NW2, they are coming mid-table, but as it gets harder and harder, the accuracy is helping them out. So they get faster times because they're accurate and because the person knows exactly when that dog is in odor or it hits the odor. So that's really the difference. I don't know if there is really any trials in Europe. There's trials in the UK.
It's worth pointing out that focus on accuracy rather than time, as you said, in the earlier levels, they're going to come mid-table, but actually they're getting, I don't remember the language of it, but your students are getting those reports.
They're getting pronounced on all the searches.
Yeah.
Nice.
And one of my students has just done her NW2 and she came first.
Yeah.
And my other student just did her NW1 and came second. And that also the trials that you have over there have way more dogs because we have to take more time in judging.
Yeah.
Like 15 minutes with a dog, you only maybe get 20 dogs in a day. So it's a lot more kind of relaxed, I guess.
And I think like one thing I've seen through your students in the States is that what it means is you've got the structure that's already there, the NACSW. And if you want to do scent work, that in the States right now is going to be the avenue you're going to go, right? Because it's got the most trials.
AKC, yeah.
Most trials.
AKC, and AKC does too.
Yeah. So you can take the same structure that's there and be incredibly successful, but you have to be a little bit more patient. So again, it comes back to understanding what's going on in the dog's brain, what you're building between you and the handler, because Elliot goes through that with his students and he explains, you know, you're going to come mid-table for the lower levels. And the reason is because some people are just going to go in there and be super lucky, right? The dog's just going to accidentally come across the odor and they're going to win. But it doesn't mean that their dog has, you know, the accuracy or the skill or the problem solving ability that your dog does, but it doesn't matter at those lower levels. But as the levels get harder, then you start to see that all of that
it's foundations.
Yeah,
basically.
that time and effort that you've put into those foundations is then reaping the rewards because you've got really robust behavior that is built that doesn't require luck or, you know, doesn't require accidentally tripping over the odor in order to be very good because they're going to methodically be able to work through the area. So yeah, it doesn't necessarily mean that you have to change the framework of the competition, but it does mean you have to understand what the strategy is, because otherwise you would be thinking, but hang on a minute, I'm not doing as well as, you know, that dog over there. But once you understand how to interpret the dog's body language, how to work with the dog on accuracy, ensure that the dog's, you know, confident, working autonomously, motivated, etc., then you're like, okay, I can see how we're going to progress through this.
And that is true because we are having that issue in the States. Like we are very big at my facility and in our area about foundation. Don't worry, you got to go slow to get there fast. And people want to hurry up and do it. And I'm like, well, and there you will have people that do well at the lower levels, right? They're going to do better, but where they're going to struggle is when they hit the higher levels. They're just not going to do as well. So that's just kind of how it is. And people are always in such a hurry, you know, to do that. So somebody had a question. Well, a couple things. Christy had a comment that we were talking about the barn hunt blinds, that in AKC, they're not as structured in that everybody can get in line. So it creates a little bit of that holding pen situation that barn hunt does. So that is true, Christy. I would agree with that. And
so sorry, is that AKC for scent work?
Yes, AKC. The dogs are out, and they sometimes line up, you know, 3 or 4 deep. And NACSW, that's not how we do it. That doesn't work like that. But in AKC, that's exactly how it is in some places. Right. So then it creates, not all of the trials are like that, but some of them are, which creates that holding pen stress situation. So it would be definitely good to talk about that at Brain Camp. And Debbie said that, so the trials in Europe are more subjectively judged. Would that be a...
Yeah, I would say they're more kind of operational style trials. Does that make sense? So they're more like, we don't generally have a trial in a hall. We'll generally have a trial in maybe a castle, or, you know, it's as if the dogs may be working. It's as if the dogs are maybe working rather than a kind of competition, if you see what I mean.
Yeah.
And we're much more subjective, and we always have 2 judges, and those judges talk to each other at the end, and we go through a big list of, like, what was the handler like? What was the dog like? How did they find? Was it good indication? Was this? And there's 10 or 11 different things, and you write comments for each one.
And you
so
score
the handler,
it,
and you score it,
one.
and you score each one as well. So everything's out of 100. So you get sort of 10 for each one. And yeah, it's there's one company, the company that started up Oak Trials over here years and years ago, who do it like that you do in the States, which is everything's timed, but it's sort of changed.
Much easier. That's essentially why it's set up that way, because it's just so much clearer. It's so much more objective. The question is whether it's actually ordering according to skill. That's the problem. So you either plump for something that's very much easier to judge, but then, are you judging what you should be judging?
Well, for instance, if you've got a very old dog doing a trial and you've got a 2-year-old whippet doing a trial, the whippet's probably going to get round faster, right?
Oh, sure. Yeah.
Is that fair to the older dog? I mean, I know there are trials for older dogs anyway, but this is what it's. It's over here. It's just a bit more. I don't know.
Well, it's an attempt to quantify from the different scores.
Skill,
so
Mm-hmm.
to look at the different aspects of what it takes to be a really great partnership in scent work, and then to break that down. And it's transparent, so none of it is secret squirrel. That's why you get the copious notes at the end of the trial, is to make sure that all of that is transparent. So you can see how you scored. If you're 7 out of 10, it goes through exactly why it's 7 out of 10. So it's an attempt to quantify based on the.
It was also an attempt to give people something to go away with, right? So you've done this trial, you did really great, but this section, this bit, and this bit, maybe you need to go and do a little bit of work on. So we'll tell you that. We'll say, you weren't quite as good at this bit as you were at that bit, so maybe it's something you can work on. So it gives them a bit of knowledge to go away with and something to work on until the next trial.
Which is pretty awesome.
You can't have as many dogs, and I know in the States people have got. One of my students at the moment is on a waiting list for an NW2. She's number 30.
Oh yeah, I mean, that's common. And at the higher level,
we don't have that.
Yeah, at the higher levels, we have our elite. Our wait list can be up to 100.
Right. The NW3 is quite a crazy one, where you have to win, or you have to pass it 3 times before you can go up and stuff. And and the wait list for those, and people are taking 4 or 5 years to get it because the wait is so long they can't get into the trials.
Right. And we, and hosting trials is challenging because we have to get in novel spaces, right? You can't, like at AKC, you can do it at our, like a training facility, like my training facility. We do trials there all the time, but NACSW, we can't do that. We have to find a location and a place and all that jazz.
Challenge.
It just becomes a little more complicated, and it's a lot of work to do them. So, but there's more and more people jumping on and doing them, so that hopefully.
That's good.
But the thing is, one of the great things about all these dog sports is you get to and that's kind of what I'm big on, is having a relationship with the dog and doing something together, and it just adds to our lives as well as theirs, right? Hopefully in a very positive way. So we're coming up to the end, and I know it's late over there for you guys. So just for all of you that are out there, Brain Camp is going to be at Foyer Canine in Elmhurst, Illinois, July 19th through the 21st. So the first day is the puppy/adolescent day. That's a 1 day. That they're going to go over all the great stuff that Dr. Murphy spoke about. And then the next 2 days, you can sign up for agility or scent work, even though we could probably take a couple more for scent work, but that's full. And there, that's a 2 day. I'm going to put the link in the chat so you guys can. There's still spaces in the adolescent and for the agility track. Agility, and there's still plenty of auditing, so you can sign up for that if you want to come and observe and learn. And as Dr. Murphy said, you can kind of wander between both and check those out. So that's kind of the
auditors basically get to hang out with me because I move between the different groups and watch what's going on. So they're welcome to do the same.
We're trying to sell spaces. Ask for refunds.
I think ultimately, if you're looking for information on why you're having trouble, especially with your teenagers and how it seemed that I would highly recommend it. I think it's something that's missing in training. And when I saw Dr. Kathy Murphy before, I was just like, just wanting more, right, to understand it better. because it's missing in training. People think that they can do whatever, and there's actual biology behind it. So if you come and work your dog, even if you don't do agility, I mean, I think there's some sequences with agility, but basically they assess each time you come out, they'll assess you to determine where your dog's at, whether you're working, able to proceed forward with the task at hand, or you need to step back. So that was the other nice thing that I saw is they will adjust according to where you and your dog are in at that moment, not focus on getting the task done.
Yeah, it's a dog in front of you always.
Yep.
Always a dog.
Always. Absolutely.
And so, yeah, I think that. So I just I'm putting that in the chat right now. You can also go to our my website and be able to grab the link there and go in and sign up, or email me if you have any troubles with any of that. Thank you both for joining us, so chatting with us for a minute, and giving us all this great information. And then hopefully some of you will be able to come to Brain Camp. And again, if you have any questions or issues or whatever, please feel free to contact me, and I will make sure we can make it happen.
Right.
Brilliant.
See you next
Thanks.
month.
It's so great to see you guys. I'm really excited. It's gonna
All
be
right. Yeah, I can't wait to see you guys too. So really excited about you coming out. Oh, the other thing I forgot to mention, Elliot is also doing a couple. He's staying. We're keeping him for a couple of more days. So he's on Monday and Tuesday, July 22nd and 23rd. He's going to be doing a couple workshops at our facility. The working spots are full. However, there's plenty of auditing spots there. That's also on our website at foryourcanine.com. So if you want to, and he's doing a full day on man trailing, which is a little different than tracking. And I think, again, the working spots are full, but auditing, you'll get to learn a whole lot there too. So those filled up. So it's going to be for us a week long of sniffing and learning, and so it's going to be great fun. So anyway, just wanted to put you out there. And again, thank you guys for coming on, and I can't wait to see you guys next month.
Yeah,
Cool.
It's going to be great.
Thank
All
you.
right.
Thanks,
See you soon.
Bye-bye.
Take care. Bye now.